episode of Witchcraft and Voodoo, where you can talk to me, a voodoo priestess, and my co-host, Sable Aradia, who's a Wicca priestess. Say hi. And tonight we're going to talk about protesters and protesting in the witchcraft and voodoo communities. It's something that's come up a lot lately. I've been at a couple events this summer of 2018 that have had protesters, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit. And I think it's something that, we've always had to deal with having resistance to what we do, but I think in this particular way that this is something that, I've been a practicing, both witchcraft and voodoo person for over 25 years now. And I think this is something I've had to deal with much more hostile kinds of aggression towards us than I did, say, there might have been a nasty word or something 25 years ago, but now there's signs and social media and all of this, just hate and misinformation that's being thrown at us. And that really makes me sad. And I think, I also my parents grew up dragging me to protests, and it's my daughter's birthday today. I'll give her a shout out.
Happy birthday.
I have the cutest picture of her at a ACT UP LGBTQ rally when she's about 3 going, ACT UP, fight back. So cute with her little fist. So
that's so cool.
Yeah. I know, so cute. So, I protested all my life, and my daughter protested all her life and still continues to, so this is something that I think, unfortunately, now we have even more stuff to protest against. I had thought it would be better, by the time that my daughter was grown, and it's not, unfortunately. And this is something, just being a woman of color and being, just going out there and trying to live a life has become difficult in a lot of ways in the modern society. So I think this is something that if we have a conscience, we really do have to protest, and those things are dangerous.
I'm bisexual, and I'm, pretty vocal feminist type, and I tend to run into a lot of that too, and have all of my adult life as well, at least, and in school. And yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. My own personal perspective is that one of the reasons why I've been withdrawing from my more public work with the Wiccan church organization that I've been involved with is I'm tired, right? I'm tired. I'm tired of the fact that at everything that I do, right? Like I started getting actively public in the early 90s, right? Since basically I graduated high school, right? And here we are, it's 30 years later, right? And there's still everything. I was at it's a kind of a metaphysical new age sales event, right? Where we had, a little fair, and there were psychic readers, and I was selling my witchcraft supplies and my books, and, and I still had to deal with some ass, right, who had to tell me all about how, evil witchcraft was. And, what? I'm tired. It's 30 years, right? You cannot, I just, what is going on out there? Why is there this willful ignorance? Surely, after all the work that we've been doing with Pagan Pride, which I started doing again in the early 90s, right? This cannot possibly be unknown to people now, what we are and what we do, right? This has got to be willful ignorance at this point. And I'm just tired, right? I'm tired of it. And I'm willing to jump out in defense of other people, but at this point, I don't care to start the fight for myself, right? And that's where I'm at. And, I'm a little burnt out with it, and it's a shame. And yeah, so yeah, let's talk about this, because it's frustrating to me. And there's been a lot of reasons lately why things have gotten more aggressive. Witches tend to overlap a lot of areas of social activism, right? We tend to support feminist causes because we believe in divine feminine. There's a strong feminist goddess community that overlaps with Wicca quite a lot, right? And is active in the pagan community. So we tend to support that, right? And we've also been an area that's traditionally been a haven for LGBTQ plus people, right? Obviously, I found it so. traditional British traditional types tend to get a lot of flack for gender essentialism, and that can be true. I've seen that a lot, but there's also, I think, far more communities that are more open and welcoming to the Rainbow Tribe, and so we tend to do a lot of that kind of activism. We do environmental activism, obviously, because it agrees with our spirituality, right? And we tend to be opposed to oppression, right? Because Aradia says, let you be free. You shall be free from slavery, right? That's part of the charge of the goddess. It's our one, everybody who's like a Wiccan, that's our one unifying point of liturgy, right? So it's part of our spirituality. So we do a lot of activism, right? And so there's that balance too. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I went way off there, but I'm feeling you.
You didn't go off at all. No,
I'm feeling you.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I think that's interesting, and I definitely understand why you've withdrawn from things a little bit, because it is really hard. It is really hard to, I mean, it's hard to know how to respond. It's hard to know, I do an event here in New York City called Witches Fest, and I've been doing it for the past 3 years, and we've had active, vocal Christian protesters for the past 2 years, and it was interesting to see how the different, practitioners responded to it. I did not engage with them, but last year was it last year? No, it was the year before when they were there. They were being like really loud while I was trying to give my workshop. It's an outside event. So anybody who knows me, I'm a teeny person, but I can be really loud. I used to sing on Broadway, so I just did my best to be really loud and entertaining over them. I mean, maybe I said things that were a little bit more shocking just because, as far as I was concerned, they were saying things at me that was shocking, so I did that. But after about, an hour's worth of screaming, that was, all I could take at the moment. So, I think maybe we ended about 5 minutes early. Now they have these little microphones for us. We look like Taylor Swift, so it's great. We dance around. I feel fantastic. Yeah. So I don't have to yell over them anymore. But, some people did engage with them. Some people did kind of, try and do some kind of spell or potion in front of them, which I really, I don't know. I have better things to spend my time on. You're talking about protesting. I mean, there's kids out there that have been taken away from their parents, and that's one of the saddest things that I could even remotely imagine. And there's people that are dying on the streets. And if I'm going to use my energy to sort of help somebody, I'm going to use it to help that situation rather than, like, if these losers want to stand there and protest in front of me, that's fine. I don't know.
This is it. See, this is where I'm at, right? Right now, I feel like we have bigger causes to deal with. Yeah. And I'm using more of my energy of activism towards those bigger issues that tend to, there's many reasons. Children being taken away from their parents, that was, I don't know, for me, that was kind of like the gloves are off and we now know exactly what you are. You're fascists and you're slavers and we have to stop you, right? And that's it. That's what we have to do. So this is where I've been putting my energy, is towards those kind of causes. And, and I have infinite energy for that, right? I have lots, because the consequences of failure are destruction. So I am a cornered animal, and I will fight to the death, right? But so for that reason, I don't have energy for, okay, I have to educate you about my religion again. Fine, I'm just going to do my thing, and whatever. And they overlap, of course they do, because it's my spirituality and my ethics of my spirituality that drives me towards these points of activism where I feel like, okay, I can't compromise on this. This is something I've got to stand up for, right? But that affects more than just me, right? And more than just my little group. So I don't know. I feel like it needs more of my attention right now, right?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you 100%. You know, I have children, I have godchildren that are people of color that are out there. It's a dangerous world for them to live in, you know, and I think a lot of my time is spent on protecting them and making sure that they're safe when they're out there, you know, because it's a dangerous world we live in. And, you know, lately this has just been, you know, it's shocking that they're doing what they're doing. Again, I
Exactly.
feel I say that to them when one of them does want to engage with me. I'm like, aren't there things that you could be better spending your time on protesting or trying to change? I mean, I'm doing my best to educate people about an ancient religion. You know, I think that they're coming from a place of ignorance and a place of bullying, and I don't understand it. I really don't, you know. I was also this month at Hex Fest, and we had a lot of Catholic protesters that I get up really early. I go to bed late and I get up early. I don't know how this happens, but that's what I do. So, and I saw them first thing in the morning, you know, and they were set up down the street in front of the church, and they had signs, and they were saying a bunch of really ridiculous things about us, and they had a lot of, you know, cameras there, and they were recording all of it. And you know, and then it was also reported, I mean, people can read about it in the paper, but you know, that they were putting stuff under people's doors in the hotel where we were, trying to convince them that we were evil and bad and all of these things, you know, which again is this sort of bullying scare tactic that I thought they purported to be better than this, you know, and this is what they're trying to do. There was one amusing thing, unfortunately, that didn't make the papers. Somebody, she was not Catholic, but she was an evangelical Christian who was protesting Hexfest, and she made this video. It's since been taken down, unfortunately. I wish everyone could see it because it was hilarious. She was convinced that we were sending spy flies to come and spy on her, and she knew they were sent by the witches and the voodoo people because she couldn't kill them, and that's how she knew. So we all started with the hashtag spy flies. It was hilarious. It was one of the funniest things. It really was. I wish everyone had seen this and the spy flies.
This is a contradiction of logic that just blows my mind. Okay, right? Okay, so I was a public witch in the 90s when the Satanic Panic was a big thing, right? Especially in British Columbia because of that whole Michelle Remembers thing, which was local to like the Lower Mainland and Victoria, right? And so the worst possible thing in the world to be at that time was a witch because, you know, the Satanists never seemed to get in the crossfire, but the witches
Yeah.
did because we're like, we're not doing anything wrong here. What's the problem? And of course, you know, okay, that's going to be another topic later on because there's a whole saga I have to tell of harassment by the Ministry of Children and Families and people having their kids taken away, and like these are my friends, right? So this is not you know, I heard from, right? I watched, I experienced, right? So okay, so that's another topic, right? But okay, the contradiction of logic here. Okay, you really think that we're sending unkillable spy flies at you? You really think that we're doing hexes, right? That cause you to, I don't know, I don't even know, trip and break your leg, right? You think that. And you're bugging us? You're harassing us? Are you stupid? What is wrong with you, right? Like, if, come on, you know, I would not be pissing off a person who could do that stuff to me. You know what I'm saying?
No, I agree. I agree. I mean, you know, the gentlemen who run Hexfest, Kristen Day and Brian Kane, I wouldn't want to piss them off under any circumstances. So I don't know why these people decide to go toe to toe with. I have no idea. I have no idea. You know, makes me
Yeah.
sad.
Okay. What it shows to me is that they don't really believe any of this nonsense that they're saying. They just want someone to hate on, right? They just want an excuse to have someone to bully and abuse, right? If you really believed it, you wouldn't be doing it because you would be smarter than that. Kind of like, you know, you don't drive your car at 200 kilometers an hour because you're going to die, right? You know better than that if you're grown up. So, you know, it's totally an excuse for abuse, right? And I won't put up with it. I just won't. I just will not do it, right? Protesting, depending. Okay, fine, right? I think it's ignorant because I don't go to your church and protest how your religion is often used to justify misogyny, tyranny, racism, and a whole lot of other horrible things that I happen to have issues with in the way a lot of Christian doctrine is presented, right? Depending on what you emphasize in your variation of Christianity. I won't say that I'm opposed to Christianity. I'm not, right? There are lots of people who have a much more positive interpretation and are good people doing good work in the world, and good for them, right? But you know, I don't go to my local evangelical church and, you know, hold hex circles to banish you from the community. So why are you coming to my circle and doing a prayer ritual, right? You're rude and you're offensive and you're a hypocrite, right? And you know, I mean, okay, you don't like what I'm doing, fine. You're welcome to that, right? And you're entitled to protest, right? But come on, you know, can you, like, you know, rail against us in your pulpit and leave us alone, please? You know?
No, I agree. And I think that was definitely some people's response, you know, to the ones that we had in New Orleans, that we should do a response where we were out there counter protesting and things like that. Somebody suggested bikinis and tutus. But the thing that really gets me, you know, like I mentioned that first year that I was at Witches Fest, that they're actually going, and, you know, not everybody who was there could speak louder than them. They're actually trying to disrupt the teaching moments that we are trying to have, that people who came there with that intent to learn from us, you know, it's all free classes, it's a street fair, you know, like that would just be, I'm sure if I went into a Catholic church and started screaming, you know, louder than the priest, that I would be arrested. There's no question that that's what would happen to me. And it's New York City, so who knows if I'd ever be seen again. But
real point.
No, it's true. But the fact that they can go and do this, you know, oh, well, they're just on the edge of the street festival and they're just, you know, I just don't think it's right. I mean, I agree with their right to protest, but I do not think they should disturb things, you know, to the point where we're not able to still conduct our religion and teachings in the way that we need to.
In Canada, we have rules about that. It is actually illegal to disrupt a religious representative who is in the process of doing their duties. And we have made use of it. The group that I belong to in particular was required to make use of it. There is a branch of the Congregationalist Wiccan Association that operates out of Vancouver Island. And there were a couple of very loud evangelical protesters who were there, you know, trying to, you know, I don't know, exorcist out the demon worshippers at the place that they had rented legitimately for, you know, like it was a public hall, and they rented it legitimately for the performance of their monthly ritual that they do there, right? They gather every full moon, and that's what they were doing, right? Well, they called the cops, and they had these people removed. They were very nice to them at first. They were, you know, like, hey, you know, like, you're welcome to protest, but you can't disrupt the ceremony, you know, please stop, right? And they wouldn't stop, so the police arrested them. I don't know if the video is still on YouTube, but it was for a time, right? So it's there. I mean, you know, it was a thing. And I'm glad that this rule exists for that reason, right? I mean, like, they're allowed to protest, but they're not allowed to disrupt a religious person. And I think that that's a reasonable attitude. Like, that's a good place to draw the line for me, you know?
No, I think so. I mean, I also think we're supposed to have something in place like that, but nobody, you know, nobody's going to give it to us. It's back to this again. Like, I don't think that would work in our favor. Like, so many things don't work in our favor when we're from an alternative religion or one that's been marginalized and still continues to be marginalized, you know? And I think that, yeah, that's how I feel about it. You know, like I said, some of my friends, one of my friends who's a journalist was like, Lilith, I'm going to pretend I'm possessed and I'll shake on the ground and then you can exorcise me and we'll get the demons out in front of them, you know? So I kind of, We thought about it for a minute, a moment of street theater, but it's not even worth my time at this point. It's really not. It's really not. Like I said, I have other things to do, more protecting things, as I mentioned. I did want to throw a couple of those out there.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Yeah. I think we need those kind of things.
I mean, we're really big on doing gree bags or mojo bags, or they're similar to, I guess most people call them medicine bags in the Native American traditions, just little teeny natural cloth bags that you can carry in your pocket with things that are for you for protection. Now, I'm not going to tell you should know what's best for you for protection, but those things might be something like, myrrh or sandalwood or lavender. For us, we're really fond of doing cotton to keep things calm. For Obatala, that's a really good one. Dill, maybe for communication, if you're trying to get your message across, things like that. Depending on what you were going to do, if it was a little sort of creativeness, I might stick a cinnamon stick in there for invisibility to make sure nobody sees you do what you're doing. Remember the Women's March, my friend and I, we were putting mustaches on all the Trump posters. So we didn't want anyone to see us doing that. We got away.
No.
Yeah.
Good one, though.
No, it was good. It was very funny. It's very funny. Yes. But that's my basic thing, I think, that I can think of. Crystals, obviously, would be really good for putting in there things that are going to absorb some of the negativity that might be directed at you. Something like, black tourmaline or black kyanite. Definitely. What would you use, Sable?
You know what? That's a very similar thing, right? We tend to call them mojo bags as a general rule, as the least, culturally appropriating term that we can use, right? But they've been a part of witchcraft since it was folk witchcraft, like forever, right? So obviously, I guess, right? We tend to use a lot of, like, I like your idea about dill. We would use that for communication as well. I like the cotton idea. That's not something we commonly use, but I'm probably going to borrow that next time because that's cool. We would use rose quartz for, communication, understanding, like reaching out to each other's hearts, right? Or we would use a lot of like pointy things. Pointy things are all protective, right? Holly, briar, right? Like just that, with it's a barricade, right? Is the idea, right? You can't get past our fence, So, Oregon grape locally, because it looks a lot like holly. And
nice.
Thus, it tends to be substituted for the same purpose, right? You gotta be careful though, because they can poke through the bag. That happened. But black stones, yeah, for diffusing and absorbing negativity. Again, black tourmaline, something that's we would use that too, right? Often obsidian or hematite is also used for the same purpose. But yeah, it's all, generally a black stone is considered to be protective to either absorb or dissipate negativity. Invisibility is a bit more complicated. I like the cinnamon idea. That's not the first time I've heard that, but it's not common among Wiccan practitioners that I know, but I like that too. Right? Ritual magicians have a ritual called the Ritual of the Rose Cross, which I have used to for invisibility purposes and found it very effective. So, I have some training in ceremonial magic, so I use a lot of that stuff too, right? And traditions that do have a lot of overlap, like more British traditional Alexandrian types, they would probably borrow that stuff too. Another thing that you can get from that branch is the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, which is supposed to protect you against, earthly influences that could have an effect. And there are variations for different elements. Like if you're trying to protect yourself from, negative speech, right, then you might want to do air banishing ritual instead, right? Because that would be associated with communication. So, simplest thing I've told people to do is you get one of those like little McDonald's packets of salt, right? And when you feel the need for protection, you open it up and draw a salt circle around yourself with it. So, simple, quick, and easy magic stuff. There's psychic defense kind of things where, like the basic stuff is picture a bubble around yourself, right? And then you can do things with that bubble, right? You can make it semi-permeable so that only positive things come through to you, right? You can give it spikes, right? Which lets everybody know to back off, right? You can put a mirror sheen around it so it reflects everything that is aimed at it, right? You know, those kind of visualizations they're simple and they're basic, and we teach them to, you know, our earliest students, but they work, so that's why we teach them, right? You draw a pentagram on your forehead, right? Visualize it as, you know, sort of a gas blue color. That's supposed to be the protection and reflection color, right? Another one said visualize yourself as, you know, like a predatory cat walking through things, so you end up carrying your head higher and you walk with more confidence and people know not to mess with you, right? If you have to go through an area where you're going to feel afraid and uncomfortable, if you can do that, right? I mean, that's not always possible. Sometimes it's clear that you know, your fear overwhelms you, and it's reasonable fear. We have fear for a reason, right? But sometimes you can do that, and it gives you that extra bolster of confidence, and then you can, you know, address things more confidently, and bullies are less likely to attack someone who looks like they're going to be a difficult target. It's a fact.
No, I think those are great because they would all sort of put you in the right mindset for what you're going into. You know what I mean? Maybe you won't necessarily be able to hold that image in your mind while you're standing in front of the police with the, you know, weapons or anything. Right. But on the way to the thing, or when it, you know, anybody who's been to one of these things, you have to stand around for a really long time, you know. So that's a good thing to just focus your mind on, I really think, and that will make you stronger and more successful.
Yeah, I think it's effective. Yeah. Right?
Definitely. Definitely. I mean, I think there's a way in which we need to sort of support each other as well through these things. You know, yes. I think there's so many times where we get petty or jealous or infighting or witch wars, or voodoo people are even worse with witch wars, you know, and I think that there's so many things that are getting us from the outside these days that it really is a time where we have to sort of turn that around and flip the script and realize that we do have the same goals, even if we 100% don't have the same kind of ideals or methods or all of those other little things that go around with it.
You have a real point there, and yeah, I think that's a problem, right? I mean, okay, the truth is, because a lot of people don't find their way into a marginalized faith unless they already felt marginalized in their life. So we create these little communities, and then because we're so eager to belong, we defend them to the death, right? And so we end up getting caught up. We feel existential threats from things that aren't existential threats, right? You don't have to be the big cheese in the area, you know, other people can be big cheeses too. Actually, it's much less tiring when you have other big cheeses because then they can do some of the work and you can take a day off every once in a while, right? So, you know, I mean, you really don't have to defend your territory that violently. And so if we could, you know, recognize that, okay, you're here and you're accepted. You're part of the tribe. You know, you said you were, right? And you're not abusing anybody in the community. So that's all we ask, right? So welcome. Yes. We'd love to have you. Great, thank you, right? And yeah, let's remember that, right? That whether I agree with your methods or not, right? Maybe your methods are different, right? But our most of us are on the same side of the fence over here, right? I won't say that there aren't those in the community who are not on this side of the fence. Being pagan does not necessarily mean that you support LGBTQ people, right?
That's for sure.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, that's a thing, right? Or people of color, right? There's a strong racist you know, thread that runs through this community, and it's disgusting and I hate it, right? But the people who are on this side of the fence, right, we're all here together, and you know, you can use your strengths and I can use my strengths, and we can use them in different ways to accomplish the same purpose. And it's really not a threat if my strength is doing good things over here and your strength is doing great things over there. There's so few of us compared to everybody else that we don't have time for this crap, at least if we want to continue to exist, which I do.
No, I agree. I agree 100%. I mean, there's been so many issues lately where people have come up that have not, especially just in the past couple of weeks, I'm not going to name any names, but who haven't come out on support of the issues that you're talking about, you know, and I think that you're right. Those who are on this side, we really need to put aside those petty differences. And that makes me sad too, that people don't, you know, I get around and I know a lot of, you know, other, Isaac used to call them big nose pagans, but
big nose pagans?
Yeah, big nose pagans.
What's that about? I don't know. What's the reference?
He would just say those were the people that were like the higher ups or whatever. For some reason, he thought they all had big noses. I don't know. He had a big nose, so maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know, but that's what.
That's an interesting thing. I find myself wondering if he means, because that's potentially problematic in and of itself. I find myself wondering if it's a big nose in terms of has to stick their nose in everybody else's business. Which,
well, that could be too.
You know. Or if it's a veiled anti-Semitism reference, which I really hope it isn't. But, you know, that's been used for that purpose before, the big nose.
It's true.
Thing. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if any of the people he mentioned were Semitic. No, I don't know. All I know is he had a big nose, and he did refer to himself as a big nose pagan.
Okay.
Not Jewish.
All right.
So
if he's gonna include himself in the group he's mocking, that's cool. I'm fine with that. That's great. Self-deprecating humor is useful.
Yes, he was fond of self-deprecating humor. But
you're right. The big nose pagans have an obligation, right?
Yes.
To stand up and say things when they see stuff like this going on in the community where, you know.
Well, you know, I mean, again, this is taking a turn. I'm not naming names, but there have been a couple of really prominent pagans lately that have been getting crap for, you know, not supporting trans women, for not supporting, you know, people of color. You know,
not naming names, there are big nose pagans, as you put it, who have been on the side of the anti-trans and racist rhetoric, and that's not cool, man. I'm not with you. We're not friends.
No,
you know?
I'm not with that either. You know, I mean, in any way, shape, or form. You know, I find it disgusting, and I really don't think that that's what it means to be a pagan or to be a witch or to be even a voodoo practitioner. I mean, we do have certain initiations. It's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about, you know, people being trans or people being LGBTQ within the Santeria faith, and I think a lot of the prohibitions in that faith just have been recent additions to the religion, and it really comes with, you know, stereotypes against those people within the Latino community, which nobody will deny, you know. So, and I think that there are still small pockets where those people can still practice the tradition, although it's a rarity. But
that's a shame that this kind of thing is going on.
Oh yeah. Definitely. The same way that the role of women has been downgraded in the past 200 years because of the role of women in Latin society. You know, I think that that's, and nobody would argue with me about this because they can see it in the history.
There's, I think that, okay, in my personal opinion, and it doesn't apply to every branch of paganism, I'll just say any branch of paganism that looks to the charge of the goddess as one of your liturgical aspects, right? And it's not just Wicca that does that. There's, you know, goddess religions, and there's, you know, fairy tradition uses a variation, and, you know, sort of general paganism tends to look to it as well. Right? It is contrary, in my opinion, to our ethics and our theology to not support women, to not support people of color, and to not support LGBTQ plus people. right? It says it right there. It's all there. Aradia would not have it, right? We are all meant to be equals. Oh, yes, and we should stand up against wealth inequality. I believe that's detailed as one of the ethics that we are supposed to and charged to follow. A charge means a directive, right? You are charged to do this. We are told this is what has to happen, right? That's what charge of the goddess means, right? It's the word was chosen for a reason, right? So we are obligated to act because you shall be free from slavery. So we have to stand up against all forms of slavery. To me, that includes wage slavery. You know, this is, you know, and inequality is something that was directly addressed, right? The reason why by tradition witches were supposed to be naked in their rights is so they could all be equal. It's very hard to be full of yourself when you're naked before people, right?
Yes.
Now, some people, of course, now most interpret it more figuratively than literally, but the meaning is still there, right?
Yeah.
So if you can, to me, if you can twist that to support some agenda that opposes that, I think you're effed up, you know, right? I do, you know? So, yeah.
No, I
It
agree.
makes me sad.
I agree. It makes me really sad as well. It makes me really, really sad, you know. I grew up with LGBTQ parents, and like I said, I've been this way all my life. And anybody who, you know, they had it hard, but I feel so bad. You know, there's so many times I get mail or, you know, messages from teens out there that are part of this community, and they really feel isolated. They feel isolated about their spirituality. They feel isolated about their, you know, sexual choices. And you know, all I can tell them is it's slightly better than it was, you know, 50 years ago, because at least now, you know, there's other people that are out there. And once you can get away from these oppressive structures that you find yourself in as a child, you know that there's other people out there, which was much harder 40 or 50 years ago, you know, when my parents were younger. So I think that that's at least a thing. But no, I'm with you 100%. I really am. I really am. And it makes me, you know, some of these people that have been coming under attack have people, they've been acquaintances that I've known. And it makes me very angry that this happens, you know, and it makes me extra, you know, to go back to our cultural appropriation conversation, it makes me extra thankful for the people that make a point to not be that way, make a point to reach out to people and make those people feel welcome in all those circumstances, and to make sure to check their own privilege at the door and to check their own prejudices at the door, despite of the way they may have been raised or the people that are around them. And I think, you know, to bring it back to protesting, that is what protesting is all about, making sure people are allowed to be who they are and to live their lives in an equal and free way. Like you said, you know, nobody should have to be slaves to these things. And I think that that's at the core of our religion as well, obviously. You know, I'm not saying there's definitely some things that are, you know, there are certain levels of initiation, I said, because of the biases within Latino culture and Santeria. There's certain levels of initiation that you cannot attain if you're LGBTQ. But again, everybody's not supposed to attain those levels anyway. So I don't really see it as like a negative thing. I just see that everybody has their own sort of place within the tradition.
Yeah, I hear you there. I would see, actually, that's a good subject, right? Problematic elements, potentially problematic elements within the faith itself, right? There are those who argue that the way that British traditional witchcraft is presented, right? Okay, like I said, it tends to get a lot of flack for being gender essentialist. I think it's how it's interpreted, but there's a lot of groups who do interpret it as very much, you know, men do this and women do that, right? And it still gives, you know, more power to women within the political structure of it than typically we would get in the outer world until recently, right? So fair enough. But at the same time, it's still very much, okay, but women get this kind of power, right? They don't get that kind of power. And what about if you fall somewhere in the non-binary
Right.
area? Where do you go? What do you do? Right? And that's a constant struggle, right? That goes on. And some people, I don't know, I think we're at a point of reckoning. Wiccan leaders, right, are at a point of reckoning where we have to kind of go, well, where do I stand on that? And why do I stand on that side? And look at the theology, right? I looked at the theology, and for me, the conclusion that I came to was that God and goddess are meant to represent universal forces, right? And archetypes that have resonance in human history, but they're not meant to be limiting, right? And physical gender and, you know, internal gender are not, this is not meant to be a straitjacket, right? So, yeah, okay, we have the creation myth of the god and the goddess, but part of where that comes from is the book of the law, right? It does. I'm sorry. You can take your ancient religion claims and, you know, stuff it. You borrowed some elements of ancient religions. The founders of modern Wicca did, right? Fine, but they also extensively borrowed from the book of the law. It's really clear if you read the book, right? So, and there's also the child of the Aeon, right? Which is part of the idea of the theology of the book of the law, who is meant to transcend those divides, right? And ultimately what we're meant to do is transcend those divides. So if people are transcending those divides, why would we limit them, right? Let's find ways to encourage and include people, and, you know, let's celebrate the non-binary, and let's celebrate trans identities, and let's, you know, not be afraid to draw down deities that don't necessarily match our apparent presenting physical gender, right? Let's do it. And that's part of the beauty of witchcraft, is that it allows us to transcend these social limitations that have been artificially imposed upon us by, you know, a culture that's very difficult, you know, the weight of culture over centuries, right? We're transgressive. That's part of what we do, is challenge these limits. That's part of our theology. That's part of who we are. So that's where I came out, right? So I came out inclusive, everybody, and, you know, screw the people who don't like it, right? But everybody's got to come out on their own side of that, right? And I see there are groups that have come out very firmly, men do this and women do that, right? There are groups out there who don't let gay people join their covens, right? I think you're messed up, but, you know, I can't, that's for you to interpret, right? That's for you to interpret. So come play with me, right? If you know, I'll be happy to have you in my coven. We can, you know, transcend and do it any way you want to do it. I'm cool with that. But there are groups that don't. And the question is, you know, like, yeah, where do they stand on some of these issues? Are they standing over on the side of the fence of let's be inclusive. Let's not allow people to decide for us what we should be and what we should do, right? And some of them aren't, you know, and so then we have to recognize that not everybody in this group is going to be supporting the same goals that we are, and this is going to contribute to the witch wars, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of it. So there's a lot, I mean, I think, to stand up about lately. Yeah, you know, I mean, for us, I think there's definitely part of the religion that allows for gender fluidity and all of these things that we don't, you know, that I think a lot of modern people have problems with, but a lot of ancient cultures didn't have problem with, because these things, I think, have always existed in one form or another. So
absolutely,
when you look at those kinds of things, there has to be a place for it in the tradition, because it exists. So if it exists, then there has to be a place for it in the tradition. I think that, you know, back to the prominent pagans again, that I think a lot of them want to sort of make these sweeping decrees about this is how it should be and this is how it shouldn't be. And I think that's where it's kind of problematic, because I mean, for us, every house is different. So whatever they do is fine, and that's fine. I mean, you can't say that they're
Every
doing it right or
tradition's
they're doing
different.
it wrong,
Every
you know,
coven's different. Yep.
because we're doing it, you know. So, but there are some things, you know, that you can point to that, yes, there is this kinds of divisions. It's funny because somebody just asked me a question about, you know, when I was team coordinator for an event that I do called Serious Rising. And what all the old people wanted the teens to do was rites of passage. And the teens sort of revolted because it was all centered around this gender binary ideas that they don't have anymore. And all the old people were just like, what? You don't want our rights? You know, it was just kind of ridiculous. And I was trying to explain to the older people. I wasn't explaining to the younger people. I was explaining to the older people that this is not the world we live in today. It can't just be a god and a goddess. For them, there's a lot of different options along the way. And, you know, you can't force them into something this way or the other, because we all got forced into something this way or the other. That's how we ended up being a marginalized religion. So let's at least allow them to be who they need to be in their own backyard.
See, I recognize that I'm using a very different tone in this discussion than I normally do when we have these conversations, right? Because I don't have any sweeping decrees, right? Like, when we talk about these things a lot, you know, there's a way in which we tend to do things, and we've been both practicing for a long time, so we can speak with some authority about how these practices are typically done, and, you know, give examples of what people usually do. And I'll always say there's a caveat of, you know, this is not the one and true way, TM, right?
Yes.
But these are ways, right? This is not something where I feel like an authority, right? This is something, these are things where I'm very emotional and I don't have the right answer. I don't know what that is. I'm groping for answers and ways too, right? One thing that I find, right, this is something I mean to write about, and I never find the way to say it in print, right? Because the emotional tone is so important, but it's something I call the grandmother syndrome, right? Okay, example, most egregious example I can think of, right? Let's talk about, you know, female genital mutilation, right? That goes on in some cultures, right? Where women are surgically altered so that they will not enjoy sex as much and therefore won't be so wanton in their ways or whatever, and stay faithful in their marriages, right? Now, everyone has this idea who's not involved in these cultures that this is, you know, this horrible patriarchy, which is influencing, you know, and forcing these girls to do these horrible things, right? No, it's not the way it is. It's the grandmothers who are insisting that this is the proper way to have things done, right? And usually when the men of the community find out that this is what's going on, they get rabidly defensive of their daughters, and they're like, you're not doing that to my little girl. I will not let you, you know? So what's going on there, right? We do it too, right? Here's, you know, our example, right? I bet, and I don't know if again, you've had this experience, but lots of women will be able to relate to this. Okay, when my mother-in-law comes over, if the house is a mess, it is my fault. She has, she's all about the, you know, well, you know, you should keep the house clean and you should, you know, and my attitude is kind of like, why is it my job, right? There are other people who live here and I work and they work and they can freaking clean too, you know, right? So but that's the grandmother syndrome again, right? And what I think it is that this was beaten into them when they were young, right? That this was the right way to do things. And they had to accept it, right? Because if they didn't accept it, then they would have to hate all the people in their lives that were forcing them to believe that this was the right way to do things. As a result, as adults, we become so resistant to the idea that maybe everyone around us was doing a hurtful thing to us and to people like us, that we defend it as the right thing. And it's not. Just because it's the way it's always been done does not mean it's the way it always should be done. There's a value to tradition because there are reasons why people keep doing things in the same way a lot, and we discussed all this in the ancestors episode, right? There are lots of good reasons to respect tradition, but there are reasons to question them too, right? And we have got to stop imposing our ideas of what is the right thing that was forced on us as children, on our children, I think.
Oh, sure, of course. I agree with you 100%. You know, I grew up with my grandmother and all the things her grandmother said about this is how you know, went about things and what you did and what it meant to be a lady and all these weirdo gender roles and everything like that, you know, and I think that that's why so many of them did, you know, yes, there was the suffragette movement and all these other things that a lot of them did. But then there was also, you know, my grandmother's generation was all this, you know, mother's little helper and everything, you know what I mean? And a cocktail at 5 o'clock. I think there was a lot of self-medicating going on in order for them to get through these things because they had been robbed of their original feminine empowerment moments, even if they were people that were competent and successful and everything like that. I look at both my great-grandmothers, they own their own houses. My great-grandmother, my paternal great-grandmother, she bought a hotel when her husband lost his job. He came home and he said, oh, they sold the hotel. I'm out of a job. She said, how much do they want for it? And she had enough money under her mattress to buy this hotel. But yeah, she still spent her whole life, I know, right? She still spent her whole life teaching her children that way of thinking, that, you know, the boys didn't have to lift a finger and the girls had to do all these other things, cook and clean and take care of everybody and all of those things that, you know, we heard. And I think everybody should know how to cook and clean, but, you know,
and everybody should know how to change a tire and, you know,
a diaper,
nail a board and and change a diaper.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yes, we should.
But yeah, and I think some of those things die hard, though. You're right, because it's so intertwined with who these people were and everything, you know. And then on a certain level, I'm not going to try and be mean or nasty or whatever, but there's a certain level of agency for your own life once you accept these things that I think a lot of people are not willing to just, you know, even attack at all either, you know.
That's a reasonable point. Right? If, you know, if you don't have to do some of these things that you've accepted that you have to do, right, then you have more freedom and less excuse for why you're not doing some of the things you want to do, right? Yeah, I see what you're saying there. You know, accepting agency. Okay, I don't want to go too far in that direction because you know, that way lies darkness. If you go too far down that way, right, then you're like, well, everybody should pull themselves up by their own bootstraps.
No, I'm not trying to go to a dark place or victim blaming or any of that. Right. I'm just trying to.
I know, but you're right. You're right. There is a point where accepting your own agency is important and necessary. Yeah, and a lot of people don't want to accept their own agency. They would rather have an excuse, you know, in some cases. Right? I'm not, but I don't want that to be, I'm making this very clear, I don't want that to be confused with, you know, the idea that if everybody just works hard enough, they'll, no, man, okay, look, if you start with nothing, right, making that multiply into something is a lot more difficult than if you start with a lot, right? And the truth is we don't all get to start at the same point on this, on the race. And, you know, what my life's been, you know, my life has some real curveballs in it that have made things very challenging for me. I would probably be a lot farther if they didn't. And my curveballs are different from your curveballs, right? So, you know, yeah, it's not about that. I think the people who are all Have you ever noticed of the people who are all, you know, everybody can pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, usually inherited a lot of money from their parents who married it? Have you noticed that? I've
Yeah, I
noticed
have
that.
noticed that. I have indeed
Hmm.
noticed that.
Yeah, sure. You're a great example, aren't you?
Yeah.
I mean, every now and then somebody gets lucky. Every now and then somebody wins the lottery too. You know? Yeah.
No, it's true. It's true. It does happen. It does happen. I just think, I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff we've been talking about tonight. I mean, I think
It's all
that
connected. It's all
it is
connected.
all connected. Well, it's all things that have been going on a lot lately. A lot of things that I think those of us in the community have been dealing with on a lot of different levels, you know, and I wanted to bring this up because this is attached to it as well. I don't know if you saw there was an article in the New Yorker. There's a photo book and a gallery show coming out called Major Arcana Witches. It's all different witches. This woman who did it, it's a photo gallery.
Oh, yeah, different women who identify as witches was her thing. Yes,
I'm
I
in
did
it, but
see
I
that.
got cut from the show.
Oh,
I
that's
know, I'm so sad.
sad.
You asked me why am I sad this week. I'm like, I didn't make it into the gallery show.
Oh, that's
Um,
so sad. That's so. I'm so sorry. That's a great exhibit. I was looking at these pictures and I'm like, oh yeah, you know, right?
no,
I yeah. Oh,
it's okay. I'm
oh.
still
I'm
going to be in
depressed
the
for
book.
you. Are
It's
you okay?
fine.
Good. Do you get a copy? Because that's cool.
Well, I think it's still not even sold. It's still in the planning stages. But with all the publicity and everything that she's getting, I'm sure she's going to get a book deal for the book, and then I get a book. So, but I have the picture. I'll show it to you. Facebook is taking down pictures. I don't know what the story is with that, but I do have the
Really.
pictures. But I did want to say this. It was interesting because her name is Frances Denny, and you know, her idea was, I think she's like the great granddaughter of one of the people who was accused of witchcraft in Salem. So she
Cool.
had this
Okay.
idea that she wanted to do a photo essay of people who self-identified as a witch and what does that mean. So I think that's very interesting, you know, because it does sort of circle around the things that we're talking about. You know, what does it mean to be a witch? Can I say that I'm a witch? Can somebody else say that I'm not a witch? Is that okay? You know, I know that I don't know how much she's talked about it, but I know she did struggle with who to put in the book and some of the more controversial people out there, whether or not they were going to make the cut. So I think all of this is really interesting about how we position ourselves publicly, because ultimately when we're talking about either protesting against something or being protested against, we're putting ourselves out there publicly. And you and I have both done that for decades. But I think
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of newbie witches, this isn't something that they're used to, you know, and that's an issue that they have to be mindful of, because it's not necessarily going to be, you know, you're not going to be received like first day at Hogwarts or something like that if you stand up and say you're a witch. I still think there's a lot of negative things that come with it, and there's also a responsibility that comes with it.
That is a really good point. I would say that in answer to the question, can other people say you're not a witch? Is that okay? No. I don't think it's okay. You identify as a witch, good for you, right? Whatever that means to you, right? I think again we're back to that whole idea. They used to be much more common, right? And it was really like people don't realize how important goddess spirituality was to the women's rights movement in the 70s, right, and the 80s. It was huge, right? It was like everyone kind of wants to distance the spiritual from it now these days, it seems, but it was a big thing, and it was a big part of why people were doing what they were doing, and it was a huge driving force. So okay, there's this song by Lady Isadora. It's like one of the classic, pagan music things out there, just called Witch, right? And the lyrics are, "Why do I call myself a witch?" Right? And it's all about, it's taking your power, right? It's taking your power. It's taking it and claiming it and saying, yes, you know what? I'm powerful, right? I am standing up and I believe this, and I'm not letting other people dictate to me what I am allowed to have in terms of my own power. And people are afraid of power these days, right? Power has become a negative word, but power can mean empowerment instead of power over, right? It can, so I'm not afraid of power, right? Power is me, right? So yeah, witch is something that I claim for my power. Obviously you do too, right? And
yes.
Right. Okay. So, like, I want to also say, I said at the beginning, I've been backing off from doing a lot of like the outreach stuff that I used to do. Okay, I'm not backing down though. Right. Understand that. Right. I'm, you know, my Twitter is Sable Aradia. Right. I am a public witch. I've been a public witch for a long time, and I'm not stepping away from that line. Right. So, okay, you know what? I'm gonna start other fights right now. The fights about equality and the fights about diversity, and you know, I'm gonna start those fights, right? I'm not gonna start fights about being a witch, but I'm not gonna yield if you try to push me back either, right?
Right.
I refuse to go back in the broom closet. So yeah, it's about taking your power. I thought that was a beautiful, I saw all those, you know, the pictures that were in the article. I was like, yes, you know, and so many of these women look like women I know, right? You know, you recognize the type, right, in your community, right? Like there's the,
oh, definitely,
you know, the spiritual matriarch and the, you know, goth witch rebel, and you know, it's all in there, and I'm like, I love you, I love all you, you're all my people, I know you, you know. I'm gonna get this book when it comes out. You let me know, because I want. All
right, I will.
That's great. That's so cool. I'm gonna, and when I see you, I'm gonna get you to sign your picture.
All right, yay, awesome. Yay! I think the gallery opening is next month, so I'm gonna go. I'll blog about it, take pictures of everybody.
Yeah. Please do. I'm very excited about the whole idea. I think it's great that this is one of those things. Art is also political. Oh, okay. Because I've been actively involved in the science fiction and fantasy community lately and working on my career in that field, right? This overlaps that, right? There's these whole idea of, oh, you know, we shouldn't make, you know, writing about political, and people should just like shut up about their politics and just write the damn book. Okay, dude, art has always been political. Art is a political act by its very nature. By looking at the world through the lens that you choose to look at it with, you are saying something, right? So my writing is political, and these are my politics, and that's part of my activism. Actually, that's the main thrust of my activism. I thought about it, and I thought, oh, one of the things I do well is write. This is one of the gifts that the gods, for whatever reason, have given me. So I should be using it to do their work. So that's what I'm doing, right? And, you know, I'm sorry if some people think you should just tell the damn story, but no story's good unless it makes you question the world around you and think about your politics, you know?
No, I agree. I'm trying to think. I think that's all I have to say.
We've actually been talking much longer than I anticipated that we would, but then again, maybe I'm not surprised, because obviously you're emotional about this. I'm emotional about this. I'm invested, you know, I'm invested. I care about this quite a lot. So it's very hard to, I've got a lot to say, and I want to be careful about the way that I say it, because I don't want, I don't know, I don't want to spend my energy arguing that I didn't say what you thought I said. I want to spend my energy spreading the message that I want to spread, right? And speaking on the things that I think need to be spoken on. So, yeah, it's required a lot of thought. Thanks for coming up with this idea, actually. This is really cool. Yeah.
I know, I keep thinking we're going to run out of things to talk about, but then in the end,
you came up with something? Go on. Oh no, you were saying in terms of topics.
Oh, in terms of topics. Yes, in terms of topics.
Yeah, I know. I expected sooner or later we're going to draw a blank, and we never do. I thought we had drawn a blank today because I was kind of tired when we sat down to do this. I've not been sleeping well over the past couple of weeks. It's in part because, you know, I'm grieving, you know. I don't know if I mentioned this before. I had a dog. His name was Blue. I've had him from the time he was a puppy. He was 13 and he died just a couple weeks ago. And I'm grieving, so I'm not sleeping well. I miss him. I really feel his absence. The house seems very empty without him, right? So in part it's that, in part it's the time of year, right? But I'm tired, right? So it didn't come to me. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. We said we were going to talk about this, right? And then, you know, and we're off. And we had a lot more to say than I even realized that we would have to say. So I love these conversations, and I'm so glad that you are willing to give me the gift of doing them with me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I think this is great. So exciting. Yay. Yay.
Yay, for sure. Yeah.
All right, so I guess I should wrap it up. Okay, watch us every other Monday. Subscribe to my channel. Subscribe to Sable Aradia's channel.
I'm sorry I've been bad with Sit for a Spell for my watchers. I've been occupied with my Kickstarter and all that, but next week I'll be back. I promise. I'm working on it right now. So,
yay!
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll see you next time on Witchcraft and Voodoo. 2 weeks, and that'll be on my channel.
I'll be on her channel. Subscribe to both.
It's on her channel.
Yeah.
You gotta subscribe to us both if you want to see it all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bye.